Hey everyone, Tactics here, and with patch 9.2 getting the last PTR update before the holidays, and of course all of the heroic raid testing for Sepulcher done, I figured I would put out an update video on how Guardian Druid is looking in patch 9.2, as well as how I think the raid is going to be. With all that said, make sure you leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video and the content for more stuff like that, and let's get into it, starting with Guardian Druid stuff. So the 4-piece and the 2-piece has kind of been adjusted to what we initially thought it would be. So if you remember back in my my older video with the first update on patch 9.2, it was tied. It was completely independent. The 4-piece damage and healing proc was just a 12-second proc whenever you either pressed Barkskin or Berserk or Incarn, whatever it was. It was just a flat 12-second proc. Now it is tied to that Berserk / Incarn buff. So when you proc the 2-piece, you get 4 seconds of that buff instead of 12 seconds. But when you proc something like Berserk or Incarn, you get 15 and 30 seconds respectively. So putting a lot of that power back into Incarn. Again, I talked about this in that video, but I actually did like that the power was kind of out of Incarn a little bit and more into like the Barkskin, and made you very strong or stronger in those windows where Bear is normally relatively weak. But we're back in Incarn now, and that actually has potentially some repercussions in both talents and legendary choice, actually. So Incarn may actually be the go-to in raids. I was actually testing it out a little bit on raid testing, and it was doing pretty good, honestly. So we were getting about 10% of my damage coming from that 4-piece bonus, that ticking damage, just in pure single target. And this obviously can be a little bit gamed if a boss has like 2-target cleave that spawns occasionally. Like I can't remember the boss off the top of my head, but it was the first boss I ever tested. She would occasionally spawn an ad that you would just kill down ASAP. And so you could game it, obviously, to have higher uptime in those 2-target scenarios, even though it's mostly a single-target fight. But in multi-target scenarios, this is doing a ton of damage. The very first boss of the raid instance is actually a bit of an ad fight. And in that fight, I had my 4-piece bonus doing anywhere from 25 to 35% of my damage, depending on how well I was using it. So it is going to make you think a little bit about how you're using that 4-piece, which I really, really like, and you can end up getting a ton of damage out of it should you be able to use it correctly. So that's really cool. If we're talking about Mythic Plus stuff, that isn't on the PTR yet, right? We've data mined the text for what we think the seasonal affix is going to be. Atoma related, like I believe like certain mobs summon Atoma that give powers. We don't know what it actually does yet. I'm assuming that's going to come up fairly or in like the first or second PTR update after the holidays is where I would expect to have that, and double legendaries, because that's also not on there, so we haven't been able to test that. Though it doesn't really matter too much in the case of double legendaries, because we can test all the legendaries on their own already, and it's kind of very, very clear in Guardian's case which is going to be the go-to, and that's Kyrian, especially with, I mean, some people were arguing for Venthyr in Mythic Plus, but if you saw the recent build, the Venthyr legendary for Druids did get a nerf specifically targeted at Boomkins, of course, but Guardians get a little bit collateraled by that one. But to be completely honest with you, even before this nerf, I think Kyrian was for sure the play. Venthyr might have given you higher personal numbers, and it may still give you higher personal numbers, but if you're actually looking at overall throughput, and frankly, the Kyrian one also gives you a little bit more durability as well, which is relevant because there's a chance you just straight up drop UFR as a legendary in Mythic Plus, given how the state of things are in the next patch, right? So if you see the top Guardian tanks right now in the Great Push that just happened, they actually already dropped UFR in all dungeons, I believe. They're running the Kyrian legendary. And now you're going to be able to run the Kyrian legendary, and then because of the double legendaries, right? Because again, Kyrian is looking to be the best. That gives a big damage boost to whoever you bind it to. You saw, I think, both Windwalkers and Rogues getting bound to, depending on whether or not the Guardian Druid needed the versatility bonus to survive a pack. And then I think as your second legendary, you're probably actually going to go for a legendary that gives you a damage boost as well as a little bit of durability, but not a ton, because you don't need it, right? Especially when you have that big verse boost from binding a Necrolord monk or whoever it is, right? I think that you're looking towards probably Legacy of the Sleeper. PvP Legendary right now is what it's mostly used for, so if you're not familiar, it's just a 25% damage buff in your Incarn, as well as 15% leech and a 30-second cooldown reduction on it. So it's also going to feed very, very nicely into the 2 and 4 piece bonus, because those 4-second Berserk or Incarn procs, and by the way, it does proc Incarn if you are expecting the Incarn, the 2 piece does. So some people were saying it didn't, some people saying it did. It does proc Incarn, but you do get 4 seconds of Incarn and 4 seconds of that leech and damage buff. The one thing right now, though, is that the actual 4-piece pulse of damage is not whitelisted for Legacy's damage increase, so it doesn't get amped by the 25%. So I'd like to see that whitelisted for that, because I mean, it makes perfect sense for it to interact with the Guardian Druid Legendary kit, right? But even without that whitelist, I think Legacy of the Sleeper is just a really, really solid pick, because it gets you higher uptime on that 4-piece. It gives you a lot of power in your 2-piece procs, and frankly, just even more power in your Incarn, right? And maybe that 15% leech, maybe that 30 seconds of the healing ticks, maybe that 8% verse, occasionally 16% verse, is enough to also drop Earth Warden, which would be interesting, right? You drop UFR, you drop Earth Warden, which was doing the vast majority of your healing so far as a Guardian Druid this entire X-Pack, and then just dropping both of those in favor of just more damage and a little bit of more healing would be interesting. I'm interested in testing that out. I will 100% be testing out 0 UFR keys whenever the keys on the PTR are available, and I'm really excited to see how much Guardian Druid damage goes up, because they are now going offensively rather than defensively with that UFR build. In terms of raid stuff, I had a lot of fun testing the raid. We've obviously only tested the first 8 bosses on Heroic, starting with the first Solitary Guardian, I think it is, ending with Anduin. Of course, the last 3 bosses have been hinted at just not being tested, and it's looking like they're not going to be tested at all. We'll see if Anduin actually ends up getting tested on Mythic, or if he gets like the end boss treatment, like Denathrius, like Sylvanas, where she was tested on Heroic but not on Mythic. Now that the last 3 are just not being tested at all on either Heroic or Mythic, so that will be interesting to see. But a lot of the fights pretty fun. xy'mox, very, very cool, kind of dodging these like rings mechanic. They kind of rotate coming out from the center of the room or coming in from the outside of the room, and then of course the tank detonation happens in between that combo, and it just takes everyone across the room to where the tank is. Really, really cool looking fight, really fun. We have Halandrius, another fight that just looks amazing. He like takes you through 3 different boss rooms throughout the course of the fight. Honestly, so far I'm really hyped. Anduin, of course, didn't get to do too much testing on Anduin because that fight was really, really tough on the PTR. Hoping it's going to be super, super hard end boss difficulty, honestly, like people are hoping for, right? I think it'll be really fun if that's like a second end boss. I'm excited for that. That boss looks really, really cool. Of course, spoiler alert, the Lich King is coming back in that fight. So I'm excited for this raid, honestly. It's looking a lot better. Personally, for me, I think it's going to be a lot better than Sanctum of Domination. I'm really, really excited because I know a lot of people weren't a fan of Sanctum Domination. I actually didn't mind Sanctum. It was fine for me. I did prefer Castle Nathria, to be completely honest with you. But this raid is looking, I think it's going to be the best raid of the expansion. I hope so. I hope I didn't just jinx it. But yeah, I mean, the Prototype Pantheon, also another really, really cool fight where you're fighting the leaders of all the covenants. They all have their own unique abilities. Denathrius throwback. That's really, really cool fight. I will say there's not a lot of DPS tops, right? Almost none. There was one on Halandrius, and then they fixed that fight by buffing the hell out of his health. So there's no longer DPS tops. So it does seem they're learning on that whole DPS stops thing that was very prevalent in Sanctum of Domination. What I will say is there does appear to be a ton of frontal cones on bosses and a ton of split your raid group into 2 groups and do different things, which is not necessarily a bad thing. But it appears on several of the bosses, like 3, 4, 5 of the bosses, you have these mechanics. So it'll be interesting to see because it's been a while since that happened, right? Like if you're thinking about Sanctum Domination, I don't know if there was a single frontal cone ability, right? You had yeah, I guess you had Guardian of the first ones who had the circle ability around the tank, so it wasn't really a frontal cone, more just like a cleave on top of the tank, right? So be interesting. Melee will no longer be allowed to stand in front of the boss, so they'll die. So we'll see how that ends up working out. But yeah, that is it for this update. Again, I'll be doing more stuff after the holidays when we have new PTR builds. So if you enjoyed this video, want more updates, be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel to be notified when those get posted. Otherwise, thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you in the next video.